was really sad because I thought there was magic in the world. I thought I was special. I thought there was a God. I felt like my entire life was a waste. I felt like I was robbed. That a lot of the decisions that I've ever made, like getting married at 21 and dating and how to date and how to raise my kids, and it was all because of the Bible, and it was all religious based. And there was a lot of mistakes made, and I wasn't taught all these things. I wouldn't have gone down this path.
Welcome to Voices of Deconversion. In each episode, an atheist or agnostic shares their story of deconversion from Christianity. Our stories remind us we're in it together. They encourage us as we discover who we are and help us to embrace who we become. Now here's Steve with today's guest.
Welcome back, everyone. Today I speak with Abby Sandoval. Abby was adopted with her sister from South Korea when they were both very young children. They were adopted by an American family, a Christian American family. Abby shares her unique experience of living in the foster system in South Korea, and also her experience and the unique challenges that come with being an adopted child, especially one who has come from a totally different country and a totally different language. Abby shares some truly difficult things and heartbreaking things that she had to go through as a child. In this episode, we discuss abuse, sexual abuse, and suicide. If these are topics that are difficult for you to listen to, I wanted to give you a heads up. Something that really stuck with me after my conversation with Abby was that after going through everything she did as a child, it was really cool to hear her talk about how she can now be the parent that she wanted when she was a kid. And she can give them the life that she wanted and give them choices and help them feel that they have control, that they're their own person and that they don't belong to anyone. Abby talks more about that at the end of the episode, but I wanted to mention it here because it stuck with me. It was really, I thought, a really powerful statement, especially considering everything Abby has gone through. It's a wonderful episode. I think you're going to really like it, and it's very encouraging. Without further delay, here's my interview with Abby Sandoval. All right, well, I'd like to welcome Abby to the podcast today. Abby, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So you had emailed me and mentioned that you now consider yourself atheist. So could you tell me why do you use that term, and why do you use the term atheist to describe yourself now?
Mainly because I'm not quite sure if there is a God, and I'm not quite convinced that based off of the lack of evidence that there is a God. So I think that the proper term would be atheist.
Yeah. Well, tell me about your background, about your upbringing, and how Christianity kind of impacted it.
Sure. So I was born in South Korea, and I was adopted along with my younger sister when I was 6 and she was 2. We were in foster care for a couple years, and then we were finally adopted by a white family in California, and they already had 3 sons, and they wanted a little girl. And since they found out I had a sister, they didn't really want to separate us, and so they decided to adopt both of us. We lived kind of out in the country in the middle of nowhere, and my grandfather was a farmer. He was growing grapes and almond trees and stuff.
Wow.
And so we kind of had that kind of upbringing.
That's really cool. That's very, very interesting. So you said you were 6 and your sister was 2?
Yes.
When you were adopted. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me about your early years growing up. Like, tell me about like what you remember about the Christian influence on in your upbringing, like as you grew older. Like what kinds of things did your family do what kinds of Christianity was it, or like what denomination, or tell me a little bit about that.
We were mostly raised non-denominational. And but I also, other half of my family were Baptists, and so I would also go to church with them. Okay. And then also they put us in a Catholic school, and then later my dad became an Episcopal priest, and so we became Episcopals.
Oh, wow. So... That's a big change, I think, From non-denominational
But
to Episcopal?
yeah,
No.
yeah, but yeah, no, it is. But then they kind of became more, even more charismatic over the years, and started to get into more of the prophecies and laying of hands, and kind of the uh, Bethel Church actually was a huge influence, and so they started believing in miracles and healings and things like that.
All sorts of stuff like that. So,
So it progressively got a little bit more,
more
I guess,
extreme, maybe?
charismatic. Yeah,
Or
maybe, yeah.
charismatic. Okay, so what is Bethel Church? I don't know anything about that.
Bethel Church is in Redding, California, and they are pretty much a mega church. And
Oh.
they have I guess it was a supernatural school of ministry. That's what they're mostly known for, in which people would spend thousands of dollars, and kind of it acts like a college, but it's not accredited or anything like that. And they
Mm.
pretty much teach you how to, I guess, perform miracles and
Wow.
lay of hands and speak in tongues and grow limbs. And they also believe that heaven is opened up in their church. And so I don't think they believe in this anymore, but they were talking about angel feathers, finding angel feathers around their church and gold dust falling from the skies. You can YouTube it.
The gold dust thing happened during the Toronto Blessing, and I remember hearing about that, and I was kind of wrapped up in the Toronto Blessing for like a real short, maybe a year or something. So I remember hearing these crazy things. Yeah.
Yeah, well, my family said that they saw it and
They bought
everything.
right, they
So,
had bought into it,
yeah.
and
And
yeah.
they went to their supernatural school of ministry and
How old were
pretty
you
much.
when that was happening? When they were kind of getting into that?
Well, actually, this was much later in
Yeah.
life. So when I was living with my parents, we were mostly, they were kind of dabbling in that a little bit. I was
Hmm.
kind of maybe adolescent, 12, 13, and up.
Yeah.
They got a little more into that. But later in life, when I was fallen kind of in a difficult situation in life, I became a single mom. I moved back with my mother, and she was then telling me about all these Bethel Church
Oh,
and all these things that she's been doing in church. So at that time, I was
interesting.
kind of out of church, but that kind of got me back into church a little bit. And then I got back out of it because it got weird.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about, I guess, like as you were growing up, how did you view God? How did you view a lot of conservatives view it as like a relationship? Is that kind of how you saw it, or was it different for you?
Well, when I first was introduced to God and Jesus, it was actually through my younger brother. I didn't really believe anything he said because he was into fantasy and fairy tales and Star Wars, and he was also kind of made up great stories and kind of lied a lot. And so then one day he told me about Jesus, and I thought he was making it up, a guy who was walking on water and changing
Yeah, that's so
water
funny.
into wine and healing the blind. And I thought he was totally making this up until I ran over to my parents, and then they actually sat me down and introduced me to Jesus. And that's when I started to, I became a Christian. I gave
Yeah,
my life to, but I was like, I don't know, 7 or 8. So
7 or
I
8.
didn't
And
really
did you
know what
say
I
he
was.
was your younger brother?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Maybe.
They're my older brothers.
Okay.
They're adopted.
Oh, they're
They're not
okay.
adopted. Sorry.
Yeah,
They're biological sons, but he's the youngest out of the three.
the
So
youngest
I
of the
keep
three
saying the
brothers.
younger brother. He's actually older than me.
That's okay. Yeah, the reason I asked, my older sister is the one that pulled me aside and like I don't remember it, but prayed the prayer with me, and that was like the like the tradition I heard about growing up is that, she sat and prayed with me. So I always think of like the older sibling like mentoring the younger sibling. So that's why I was like,
Yeah, it was
oh, but
kind of like
interesting if
that.
it was a younger sibling, but yeah, so it was the younger of the older brothers.
Yes, that
Yeah.
introduced me to Jesus, and then my dad kind of helped my sister and I say the Lord's Prayer to give I guess, our soul to Him,
Mm-hmm.
our
Yeah.
hearts to Him.
Yeah.
So then we became Christian, um, and I didn't really feel any difference, but it was the influences of as I was getting older, the other kids, my friends, and they were explaining to me about the relationship you're supposed to have with with Jesus. And it was a little confusing because, like I said, I was going through Catholic school and Baptist church, and they all have different doctrines, and so it was very
Yeah.
confusing on which one's correct. And so I just remember being constantly neurotic and always having to pray the Lord's Prayer again because I thought I was going to hell because
Wow.
I didn't know which one was correct.
Wow. So it sounds like there was some anxiety about that for you.
Yes, it was when they started talking to me about demons and hell and the devil and how they operate in this world, um, saying that bad movies or music, they were portals to a gateway of opening to get demons to come and latch onto you. And so, if you have a bad thought or if you do something wrong or something like that, you might have a demonic attachment or something onto you and you have to pray it away, kind of a thing. And so it became scary. It wasn't this Jesus happy, it was
Like,
kind of this
yeah.
warfare, and it was scary, and there was invisible
Yeah.
people trying to get me. And so I started having nightmares, and um,
Wow.
but also I was it something I didn't mention is when I was in foster care in Korea, I was actually
Mhm.
terribly abused. And so
Mm.
it was very difficult for me I would just have nightmares all over the place, thinking that abuse kind of played into all of this.
Yeah.
And so it was just, I became more afraid, and I would try to constantly pray and constantly try to hopefully stay out of hell, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So it was scary.
Yeah. So you were probably, it sounds like you were going through some kind of like um I don't know how to explain it, but like it was like maybe PTSD or something
Yeah,
similar where
yeah,
like you're having these impacts from what had traumatized you when you were younger and it's carrying through, and then you're hearing, oh, there's demons that are invisible that are trying to get you. And so
yeah,
that's terrifying, especially if you've gone
yeah.
through a trauma in your life, probably.
hmm And
Yeah.
then they would try to flip and say, well, you also have powers that God gives you, and you have gifts, and He can protect you, and these demons won't get you, kind of a thing. So it was almost like the other flip, that it was also kind of alluring because people can have powers, that I could be special.
So it's a scary thought, I think, if you're a child, or it can be a scary thought.
Especially when you've experienced something so dark in your life and you realize that the world isn't quite a safe place. And so then you're starting to realize there's the supernatural world that's also not a safe place.
Yeah.
It was really hard with that, trying to feel comfort.
So, tell me, like, I guess in general, what you remember about your years in, um, your very early years in South Korea, and you can go into as much or little detail as you want about what happened, and if you don't want to talk about any more of it, that's fine too. But I'm curious, what you remember kind of in general from that time in your life.
Sure. Actually, I've been going through a lot of therapy over the years. It took me a long, long time. So I'm actually at a point in which I'm pretty comfortable sharing. So
Yeah,
if it helps people, I don't mind sharing.
cool.
But yes, I think I bounced around like maybe three different foster families. And they were all pretty much verbally abusive, and they were physically abusive. And then also there was a young, I guess, maybe in his 20s, he was sexually abusing me. And so, and also I was having to take care of my younger sister. I remember having to do a lot of chores, like making sure I make my own meals and clean up and go to the store and get things for them. And um, I
The
remember
families were
being,
having you do chores for them as a like a very
mhm,
young child.
yes.
Wow.
And I remember having to go to the store and get stuff for them. I remember cooking ramen, making my own lunches. And then I remember having to take care of my sister. They also had some kind of home business or something like that, in which they were doing something with bolts. I remember having to sit there in front of the news and kind of helping them with that. And so, and I wasn't allowed to have friends. Wasn't allowed to go to school. I was very much sheltered. I wasn't really allowed to go out. I wasn't allowed to have toys. They,
Really?
whenever,
And this is
hmm
true with all three foster families that you had? Or,
yeah, pretty much. They were all,
wow,
I wasn't,
very
they took,
strict.
yeah, they were very strict. I mean, they would get I would remember getting toys from, I think it was my uh, family that adopted me now. They were sending us toys and things, and they would show it to us, and then they would take it away. Um, and unfortunately, they also threatened to, that we were going to get killed and things like that. So it was it was very abusive and really
Scary.
stressful. It was really scary. Um, and then I was then taken onto a plane with my younger sister. Had no idea what was going on. We met a really nice lady. It was the first time I've ever met a Caucasian woman, and I remember she just looked very different that I've ever seen. And she was the first person that was super nice to me. And she flew us over to America, where we would meet our adopted family. But the problem is that they didn't explain any of this to us.
So I was gonna say, how did you know that you were gonna be taken from one family to the next, or why you were being taken from one?
Nobody explained anything. They didn't tell us any. They just got our stuff and they just took us things. Things happened to me, and I didn't know what was happening, and I didn't have a. Yeah. And so this woman, she dropped us off. She didn't say a word to us, and she left. And that was incredibly terrifying because we were in a different country, didn't know these
Whoa.
people, didn't speak the language, and they didn't explain anything.
So okay, so let me back up because I want to make sure I understand it right because this is very important for your story, I think. So, um, one day you find yourself like speaking with this Caucasian woman. You'd never seen anybody who was Caucasian before, and
Hmm.
but she was really nice to you, so that was good. So it was a very
Hmm.
friendly person, and you got on a plane with her, you and your
Yes,
sister.
and I
Okay,
believe it was probably a whole bunch of other adopted children that were all going on the plane together, but she
okay.
was our caretaker at the time. She spoke Korean, so I understood and what she was saying, and she was friendly. She was holding my sister. I got very sick on the plane, and she was comforting me, and so she was so nice. And I think it was
Okay.
the first time I met, which I felt relaxed. And
Wow,
then
in
all
your
of a
life?
sudden, yeah, my entire life.
Wow.
And then she just left me.
Oh, which is like gotta be so upsetting for a
Yes,
child.
because I thought I was safe and no one was going to hurt me again and she was going to take care of us. And then all of a sudden she just left and didn't explain anything.
And then who did she leave you with?
My adopted family.
Okay, and they were at the airport?
Hmm.
So
Came
you,
to pick us
so
up.
you didn't really understand why you were on a plane or why anything was happening,
Hmm.
and the next thing you know, you're with a family you've never met. And
Exactly.
how was that interaction? The first time you met your family, what was going through your mind, or what do you remember?
Well, I just, I was always having to be really quiet and obedient in Korea. And so you can't show emotions or anything like that. And so I think that's kind of what happened. But they took us to the mall because we had no clothes. We were so tiny, they didn't have any clothes for us. They took us to McDonald's. I never had a hamburger or anything like that. And they told me I stood in front of a mirror forever because I was trying to figure out what it was and who the person was because I'd never seen a mirror before,
No
never seen what I
way.
looked like. No.
Wow, that must have been quite an experience as because you were
Oh
6
yeah.
by that time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I was 6. Never seen myself. Never seen a mirror before.
Wow.
I was so confused on what everything was. And then I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I was so exhausted. I just started crying, and they were driving us home, and it was a long drive. And I think I was irritating my adoptive dad, and then he started getting mad and yelling at me, telling me to shut up. And so that's when I again started realizing I'm not in a safe place. And that was
Wow.
kind of that was my new life kind of a thing.
Oh my goodness.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
that was my first memory of coming to America.
that is really that's really terrible.
Yeah.
That sounds terrible. I'm really sorry that you went through that. That's like it's just so hard to hear that, people seem to be so cruel sometimes, and especially to a child, like a child who's just like very confused and doesn't know what's happening.
Well, my daddy, he had a nice tendencies, but then he just
Yeah.
had explosive tendencies as well. So he was kind of,
Yeah. That was just, yeah, on occasion he would blow up, or he couldn't
yeah,
take too much, maybe
yeah,
stress or crying or things like that.
yeah. And he also was very much, children need to be obedient and
Okay.
listen to him. And he was a very strict parent.
Okay. So you had never gone to school, and like, I mean, the world is like, I feel like the world's just like flying at you at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd never seen a bed before. I remember they took us to our bedroom and they told us this is our, I didn't know what a bed was. We slept on the floor and we didn't have toys ever. So they actually filmed me the first day in my bedroom, and all I was doing was cleaning up and taking care of my sister. That's all I was always taught to do. So
Wow.
I just completely didn't even play with toys. I was just cleaning.
That must have been so surprising for them to see. They're going to expect the child to be like, "Oh, toys," and start playing, you know?
Yeah, I think my parents were a little bit naive on what they had this,
What
I
they were
guess,
taking
vision of.
on.
Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah,
mean,
for
we
sure.
were actually meant to, I think we were meant to, I suppose, be living dolls for my mom, to be quite honest. My dad had explained that they adopted us because my mom wanted a little girl so bad. And he said that we were supposed to make them happy. That was why they adopted us. But he said, "Oh, I did over the years, I didn't realize that we're supposed to make you guys happy." So it's like they didn't
Wow.
quite
That's like the opposite.
understand.
Yeah, of what?
Yeah, they weren't really understanding how to be parents.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really crazy. Yeah. Sad to hear how that kind of all transpired for you.
Yeah, I also think that my mother wanted to take care of us and take care of my sister, and she um, didn't quite understand that how I was always her caregiver. And so I think she even got kind of irritated with me constantly taking care of my sister when it was her
Oh,
job. So it was always that dynamic until they later explained, you don't have to clean, you don't have to do any of this stuff, just play and be a kid, kind of a thing.
yeah. And do you
And
feel like you had a moment where that kind of sunk in? And you were like, okay, like it's fine for me to try to have fun. Did that ever happen?
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, my mom said that that actually happened pretty fast once
That's
I
good.
realized I don't have to clean anymore.
Okay, well that's good. And how was your sister doing through all of this that you from what you remember?
Um,
She was much
My
younger.
sister, she was pretty much a baby. She seemed fine. I think that
Yeah.
she was always having someone taking care of her, so she kind of continued on. And so,
Yeah,
but she
yeah.
doesn't really quite have memories of this time. She was so little,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we just rely on videos that they showed us.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you grew older and you were being raised in, it's interesting, a Catholic school, but you had like Baptist church and non-denominational church.
Hmm.
So you're getting a
Yeah,
lot of
that's
different
cool.
theologies. Did you ever feel like Christianity was like for you, or was your own, or you had a relationship with God that was personal? Did you ever get to that point, or was it still something that was kind of distant for you? Some people, it never kind of like, I don't know, it doesn't like attach to them, like you know what I mean? Like for some people it's just kind of, they go along with it because that's what their family did, you know.
Oh no, I really I I was very much a Christian, and I really
Yeah.
believed in God, and I believed I had a relationship with Him, and I also believed I could hear His voice and had experiences in which I felt the Holy Spirit. And some of the things I kind of maybe lied about, like my church as I got older, the other churches we went to, it was kind of a milestone if you spoke in tongues. And so all my friends got their spiritual language and I didn't, so I just kind of made one up. So
Well, hey, you're just like everybody else.
exactly. And then my parents were so proud of me.
Oh,
And
that's
so
so
it was
funny.
kind of like I kind of got that positive feedback. And I noticed that whenever I did anything religious, um, my parents would give me that positive reinforcement. And so I almost kind of made up some of the more fantastical
Yeah.
parts of the relationship, but I really believed in God, and I really believed I did have a relationship with him, that he was real and
Yeah.
all these miracles and everything was true.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just made up some of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you're not alone in that. So, well, what else is important for people to understand about your story, I guess, up to this point?
Well, another big impact was that had on me was about
Mm-hmm.
religion, and kind of a negative impact was sexuality. So I was sexually abused when I was in Korea, but I was also sexually abused again um, in when I was adopted in this family. And so when I got maybe 12 or 13, they kind of talked about there was a lot of the purity culture.
Yeah.
I got a purity ring promising that I will stay abstinent till I get married. Um, and a lot of the churches pretty much talked about sexual sin and things like that. But what I had a difficult time with was that I was already I was sexually abused, and so I was made to feel like I was complicit in it. I wasn't a victim because I had told my adopted parents of what was happening to me, and they kind of prayed it away, kind of a thing, and then never spoke about it again. And so it made me feel like I did something wrong. And then on top of it, my parents kind of had favorite children because there were so many of us, and they
How
were
many
spread
children?
so thin. And they had three, and then my sister and I, so there were five. They both had two jobs, and so they were just spread
Wow.
thin. And so they almost had kind of children that more aligned with their personalities. And I didn't really align with either of them. And so I was made to feel even more like there was something wrong with me and I did something bad. And um, in the churches that talked about,
Seems kind of common too.
mhm,
Like for abuse victims, they often feel, especially if you're younger, like that it's your fault. Or it can happen, maybe.
well,
Yeah.
especially when they don't talk to you about it and they don't get justice for you, or they don't
Yeah.
explain what to do in that situation or give you some tools to. It was almost a
To
shameful
cope.
thing, and they just didn't want to, they just wanted to go away. And I
Wow.
even had spoken to a youth pastor about it. It took me a long time to get the courage. My friends were telling me I needed some help and to talk about it. And so our youth pastor, he was
And this is junior
someone
high
I started to,
age.
yeah,
Yeah, 12, 13,
and
something like that.
exactly, teenage. So I told him, and it was, I was trying to be very brave, and I was scared, and as soon as I told him, he went and told my parents, and then my parents yelled at me about talking about it. So it was kind of like you don't talk about these things, and so I had no idea I was being abused. I thought I was already impure, and I was that I already sinned, and I could never be a virgin again, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So I didn't later until I got older and went to college and left my family. I realized how sheltered I was and how also I was being abused, and nobody had
Wow.
told me. I had to deal with all this myself in my 20s.
You didn't realize
when
it. You didn't really realize it was abuse or something that, like, you had to basically just stuff your feelings away because you were being told by others, like, you shouldn't be talking about this.
Yeah, they didn't quite say you shouldn't talk about it. It's just because nobody talked about it. Nobody helped me. Nobody explained anything to me. It almost sounded like I was participant in it, and therefore I was a bad person, and
Wow.
I was already a broken person. And I also felt like I was the only person in the whole world that had ever experienced anything like this, and so I was very isolated until I went away to college and met other people and realized there were other people that went through similar experiences, and I wasn't.
Wow. That must have been like a really big awakening for you to run into other people who've gone through things and hear their stories and maybe find similarities in what they went through and then hearing how they processed it. What was that like for you when you started hearing from other people who had gone through similar things?
Well, it was almost like a breath of fresh air that I wasn't this weird person. I mean, I was already felt so awkward living in a family that was didn't look like me, and I felt ugly being Asian, and also in a community that didn't know what Korea and Korean people were. I was pretty much called Chinese, and I was made fun of because of my eyes. And so I already felt so kind of this
Like different, like in every
different,
way,
yeah,
like not
in
just your
every single
ethnicity, but
way. And
like,
then all
yeah,
of a
everything.
sudden, um, then the sexual aspect, the sexual abuse aspect made me feel even more different. And there was something even more wrong with me. And so I did deal with eating disorders and suicide in high school. But then once I went to college and started talking to other people, I realized everyone's messed up. So
What helped you through those difficult times? You said that you had an eating disorder and then there was some like suicidal thoughts.
no,
So,
I was trying to commit suicide. Um, yes, I did try to attempt suicide. The My younger sister, she and I really didn't get along for the longest time because she was pretty much a favorite of my adopted mom, and so there was kind of a wedge between us until she started seeing how depressed I was. I was starting to starve myself, and I was also trying to commit suicide, and she was basically seeing all this. And the reason why I didn't is because she begged me not to leave her. She would come home after school crying, thinking that I already killed myself, and she just couldn't handle it anymore, and she just begged me to not leave her. So that's when I thought nobody cared about me in the family. I thought uh, nobody saw me. My brothers and my sisters, we were kind of raised separate. They actually moved out of the house when they were in high school, and they lived on their own in a house
how
that
old
my
were you
parents
when they were
provided.
in, when they moved out? How old were you?
I was in high school.
Oh,
When they were in high school, I was in elementary school.
okay,
So,
okay. So your
so
your
we
your
were
older
always
siblings,
separated.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, they were always older, and so we were. So they weren't in my life. My parents weren't in my life. My sister wasn't. Yeah, so I was very much alone, out in the middle of nowhere in the country, and so I just thought no one cared about me. So who cares if I died? And till my sister kind of said she saw me, and that's when we started developing a relationship. And she started to need me, and we started talking about our feelings and
hmm
talking about how strange it is that we're raised in this environment.
Now, was it I know I've kind of bounced around in the age timeline or
Yeah, no
whatever.
worries.
Were you in high school or junior high around the time you guys were starting to connect?
Yes.
Okay.
So my brothers were in college, and when I was in high school, and she was a freshman and I was a senior, so we started connecting. And but that was kind of my last year before I was going to leave. But
Okay. And she was still
and
doing
then
fairly well as far as you could tell, like with the parents, like
no,
she
she
was.
wasn't doing well at all.
Oh,
She was also she was being abused in different ways, but we just didn't know about abuse at the time, so we just
yeah,
didn't know. But because she was more of a social person and she didn't have that outlet, we had the internet, and so she started talking to strangers online. And my dad was also very much, um, there was a lot of emphasis on sexual purity, making sure that we do not tempt men. That he believed that men are biologically just more sexually deviant, I guess, and
yeah, yeah,
anything will tempt them. And so we had to make sure that we dressed appropriately, behaved appropriately, act appropriately to not tempt anyone. And so my sister kind of wanted to just dress however she wanted and wanted to be a normal
yeah,
teenager,
yeah.
listen to music. And we weren't allowed to we only listened to Christian music and
Christian music.
watch Christian movies, and we weren't allowed to do anything. And she was kind of more rebellious, and I was more, I will just follow the rules kind of a thing. So she
Yeah,
was going through her own abuse
yeah,
because our father didn't like her behavior.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
um, she wasn't all right either. And that's what I think kind of bonded us a little bit. So we were kind of both talking about our problems.
Okay, that's really great. I'm really glad that you had her in that time and that you guys were able to kind of connect. It just seems like even if there's just one person in someone's life when they're going through something like that, it seems like that can be the thing that helps them keep going.
Yes,
Or
just
even if it's like you don't want to keep going, just having that person that you feel like, okay, I can't leave them alone. Like that's what keeps you hanging on, kind of.
Yeah. But then I also had a friend who was also going through depression in her life, and so we kind of talked about that. And then some of my my Catholic school, my religion teachers knew that I was having a hard time, but they didn't quite know what, and they encouraged me to try to get some therapy. But I had deep trust issues. I didn't want to talk to anybody about anything that happened to me, because what happened to my youth pastor, who just went up to my mom and dad and told them what I said. So I just had a hard time talking about this with anybody, because I was afraid it was going to get back to my parents. But then when I went to college, I met somebody that she told me about abuse. She showed me papers and about psychology and about she actually was abused herself, so she talked about that, and she encouraged me to go to therapy. I told her I just couldn't go to therapy. It took a long time for me to trust somebody to talk to people about. It took years. But in the meantime, she gave me lots of books for me to read, for like self-help books.
Wow, that's awesome.
And she even had me, because she was seeing a therapist, she even had me write down questions for me to ask her therapist, and that's how I kind of started therapy.
That's amazing. She was pretty much being like an in-between you and a therapist until you were comfortable enough to get to that point. She was pretty much kind of like holding your hand through the process to help you feel more comfortable, like you can trust again, or you can actually trust or something.
Yes. So that's cool. What it kind of got me on the path to realizing that I was terribly abused and none of this was my fault, and my parents did a huge disservice to me.
What was the role of Christianity in your life at the end of high school, or in high school, as you were starting to connect with your sister, and then as you got into college? Like, how was Christianity a part of your life during those years?
Yeah, well, when I was in college, I continued to go to the non-denominational church that my brothers were going to, and they were worship leaders. They were also the part of the prayer team, and they were heavily in the church. And I realized that I started seeing kind of the hierarchy of the church. So if you were actually a worship leader, or if you spoke in front of the church, everybody knew your name. And that's my brothers. Everybody knew my brother's name. But I was so shy and didn't know anyone that nobody knew who I was, and nobody would talk to me. It was very strange. And then I actually met it was my first boyfriend, and then we actually got married, my first husband at that church. And he was also part of the worship team and the youth group. And so everybody knew his name. So people then started to know my name because of him. And I just thought that was such a weird thing for a Christian organization. They're supposed to be loving and kind to everybody. But then there was this hierarchy, and there's this,
people
it was
weren't
very
treated
strange.
The same, depending on how important you were.
Exactly. And then I would have a lot of questions. And I also noticed that if you object with any of the doctrines, or there was a person that was part of the youth group, and he came out as homosexual and he got fired. And so I started objecting to his treatment. And I kind of started to realize that you're not allowed to object to anything. And it was almost like a pack. If you started to talk and voice your opinion or have questions in front of a lot of the same people that had the similar mindset, they kind of attack you. Wow. And so I was kind of told that I was kind of annoying with all my questions, and that I was wrong. And I was just, it was almost like a subtle way of saying you're not supposed to ask questions and stuff.
You said it was your boyfriend, and did you say that you got married to him?
Yes, later we did get married.
Okay, how old were you when you started dating, and then what age were you when you got married?
We were dating 2 years before I got married, and I was 21 when I got married.
Yeah, well, I was 21 when I got married. I know it's a different situation, but I don't know if you're laughing because you're like, well, we were young. I always feel like I feel defensive. I have to tell people like, yeah, we were really young. Yeah, we got married because we were crazy Christians. That's how my wife and I think for us.
We got married, yeah. Well, I think we got married for really terrible reasons. Mainly, again, we were taught that you're not supposed to date; you're supposed to court.
Yeah.
And so when we got together, the whole idea is to get married. So we weren't really supposed to break up, because that would mean that you might get a divorce and you're not supposed to. So when I decided to date him, it was understanding that we were going to get married in the future. But also, because we had that in the back of our minds, we did actually have sex before marriage. And because of all of the things that was taught to me, I was incredibly scared and just upset that I messed up and that God's upset with me. And I had to pray, and I was crying. And so at the end, we were just like, it's okay. We'll just get married. So we didn't give our hearts away to anyone. We were saving ourselves for our husband and wives. And so
Yeah, and so if you end up getting married, it kind of justifies it in your mind as a Christian, I think.
And we didn't do anything wrong, and we were husband and wives anyway. So that was kind of the reason why we got married, which is not a good reason to get married.
Yeah.
And he had never lived on his own. He was always living with his parents. So then all of a sudden, I was also taught that your husband is, you're supposed to submit under your husband. And so he was supposed to lead, except he's never lived on his own or did anything or paid bills or anything like that. And I did. And so it was hard for me to follow.
Oh, interesting. So you had more
under somebody.
experience like doing that.
Yeah. Because I had a bit more survival instincts, and I just couldn't stand living with my parents. I just left. So I struggled, and I was willing to be even homeless for a while to just be on my own. So I knew how to do that. But he was actually, his parents had money and stuff, and he never had to struggle ever. So us getting married was really difficult. Our marriage was really, really hard.
Wow. And so when you went to college, and was it a Christian college?
No, I just went to a community college.
Yeah. And so, okay. So you get married, and you're noticing that, like, I mean, I'm not, like, I know that our experience is very different, but like I'm thinking about my wife and I trying, like, as you're talking, and how neither of us had lived, like, I mean, I had lived on my own, sort of, like I went away to college for a year, and then I had a roommate, that kind of thing, but like very short time. But you've never lived with another person, like a boyfriend or a girlfriend. At least I hadn't, and she hadn't, and so that's kind of a crash course, I think. Did you feel like this was kind of like, okay, especially for him, like all of a sudden, like, he doesn't know how to do these basic things that, of course, all of us have to learn, but like that can make it more difficult or put more strain on a relationship. Did you feel that?
Well, he was really good at some things. He actually did know how to, the logistics of paying bills and stuff like that. I didn't even know how to write a check. I didn't know how to look for a job. I didn't know how to talk to people on the phone. So he taught me some life skills, and then I taught him some stuff. So we were kind of teaching each other things at the same time. And also, he really helped me through a lot of my anxieties and depressions, and he knew about all these things, and he helped me through them. And so, and so we were really good for each other for a while. But I think we were too young, because we were just kids and acting, kind of playing house. And so, and we were spending money and getting into debt and acting, not very responsible. And but he started off, because he was part of the church, and he was high up in the church. He was pretty strict about some things with me. I wasn't allowed to curse. He didn't like me drinking. It got to the point it was a little controlling, but it was because of a certain image he had to uphold, and I had to uphold because of his position in church.
And you said he was a worship leader also?
Yeah, he was part of the worship team, and he also was part of the prayer team, and he also worked with youth. So he was a youth leader.
So he's a church leader, so he's being strict with you because he needs to keep up his appearance.
Yeah, and I had a really hard time with, it was my first time in which I was questioning things and kind of pushing back, and it's like, why can't I say the bad word? Why can't I say the F word? What does it mean? I mean, God knows, why is this upsetting? There's worse things in the world. Why this? And alcoholism, I was like, if I have one drink, I'm not an alcoholic. What's the problem, kind of a thing. And so he was a little strict at some points. It wasn't until when we moved away from the town and moved and lived in Los Angeles, and we we were looking for another church, and I started seeing kind of patterns within churches and more of the business side of things. Specifically, we were poor, and so they were asking for 10%, which is a lot of money for us. So, but they were kind of making it sound like it was more magical, like we were going to get money back, like tenfold or hundredfold or whatever. And so I kind of wanted to test it. And so I spent a month paying 10% of our tithe and seeing if anything happened. And then another month in which I didn't and see what happened. And pretty much I was richer when I didn't pay the tithe.
That's hilarious. That's kind of cool that you had an experiment, like a scientific experiment. Like, okay, I'll take you at
Yeah,
your
I
word. We'll try it for a
kind of.
month, and then we'll try it without.
Yeah, and I realized it was just
So,
kind of manipulative and and
mm-hmm.
I really I didn't like that. And we went to a lot of different churches trying to find the perfect church and realizing that there was a huge emphasis on giving them money and that there was this
Yeah,
magical aspect of it if we did. And I just realized that's BS because I just conducted that test.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I started to question things and start to realize I don't think I really like the religious organized church aspect of things. The only reason he wanted to find a church is because he wanted to play music, and that was the only thing that really he enjoyed in it. It wasn't really the sermon, it wasn't really
Yeah.
anything else except just the worship team and playing music. And I wanted to know what the pastor was saying, and they were talking about a lot about who to vote for. They were talking about politics and things that I was thinking they're not supposed to talk about. And then just realized this is the business. This is kind of almost culty. I'm not saying that Christianity or anything is a cult, but it just kind of there's this behavior in which you're not supposed to disagree, and everybody kind of nods their head, and whatever the pastor says, you clap and say amen. And it was just nobody questioned anything, and I was always like, that sounds manipulative. This sounds a little odd. Why do they say it that way?
Yeah.
And so it just kind of drew me away from church. And then I started watching documentaries on Christianity and
Wow.
starting to realize that maybe I kind of was raised in a really weird church environment, that all the things I experienced was just really strange.
And this is while you're still
Um,
married.
I kind of went through all this while we were married and kind of being in Los Angeles, away from our families, away from the church that we always went to, and started to kind of talk to other people. And that's when I started meeting atheists. But it was kind of weird because I didn't want to talk to them because it was almost like an unspoken rule that atheists were evil or
Yeah.
like Satanists. So I didn't want to talk to them.
Yeah.
So because I was still Christian, I believed in God, I believed in the
Yeah.
supernatural experiences and all that. I just didn't like organized church and on the indoctrination of children and things like that. I just had issues with that.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of during that time just kind of slowly drawing away from organized religion and church.
Yeah.
Um, and then once we were kind of doing worse in our marriage, I had the brilliant idea of having a baby, and that would fix things. And he really didn't want to, but we ended up accidentally having a baby, and things got even worse. And to the
Oh
point that our
no.
relationship got a little bit abusive. And so we realized we're no good for each other. And I got a little worried for our son. And
Mm.
we decided that it's best if we divorced, which
Mm-hmm.
was really difficult. Then we had to tell our Christian family
Yeah.
we're divorced. And so that was really, really hard. At that time, when my son was born, my dad had cancer and he died of
Mm.
lung cancer.
Mm.
And then when we got divorced, my son was about 2.5, almost 3. So my mom was alone, and so I told her about how bad our marriage was, and so she kind of took my son and I in, and that's when I started going to my mom's church with her and started seeing that she's into some really weird Bethel stuff.
Wow.
And but at the same time, the church that she went to, everyone was so friendly and they were so nice.
Yeah.
And the pastor was really cool. He was into pop culture and he was funny during his sermons. And it was a kind of a really inviting, warm, it was very intoxicating, kind of the
Wow.
environment, because I was going through so many bad, horrible things, and it
Right.
felt comforting. And it didn't get weird right away. It got weird later, but it was kind of nice. But that's when I started noticing at this particular new church my mom went to, there was a lot of adopted children, mostly from China.
Oh,
And
that's interesting.
that was when I started realizing, and that's when I started um, to kind of look into this. It was a little strange. And I was like wondering what jobs they had to afford children, and they were all
Yeah.
teachers. And so I was like, how do you afford adopting so many kids?
Interesting. And so this is
Yeah.
just when you had your son and you were living with your mom. And so
Mhm.
you're starting to kind of notice this trend at this church where there are a lot of adopted children from China. And so it seems
Mhm.
odd. So you start kind of like looking into it a little bit and like what did you find out at that point or
I found out that many of the adoption agencies were Christian based, and that there was also some perks for many Christians in which they might be able to get scholarships or some kind of financial assistance. And they'd have to provide which church they go to and perhaps get a letter from the pastor. And um, that's how they were able to kind of afford a lot of kids. And then sometimes, if they had really good rapport with the adoption agencies, sometimes they would ask them to adopt another child and they would kind of discount the price a bit.
wow.
So, um, and I just started realizing that's kind of how they're able to afford so many kids. And some of them,
Wow.
they did have to wait a long time. Some people, they did talk to me about their experience, and they actually didn't ask for any financial assistance. They actually spent 10 years trying to save up enough money to adopt, and took them years and
Wow.
years to finally adopt a child from China. So some of them did go through
A
those
lot.
things.
Yeah,
And
to do
then there was,
that.
but there was just so many. I tried to go up and try to talk to them, and I was just so excited to see somebody else that was adopted and that was also Asian, and wanted to know about their experience and stuff. But it was almost
Hmm.
like the parents were very protective of their kids and didn't really want me. I mean, I was kind of a stranger, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But the
it
parents were
was just a
protective.
little,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's almost like, I don't know, I felt like my parents were a little bit threatened by other Asian parents. And so it was almost like they're my kids. I don't want them to go back to China or go back to Korea or find their roots because they're
Yeah.
my children. It was
There.
almost kind of like that. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's kind of how I
Yeah.
felt.
That's how it felt. Yeah. So how did all of this I guess play into like did it impact your view of God or Christianity in any way at this point? Or was this
No,
yeah.
the church was actually kind of interesting because they were just so kind and warm, and very family oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And even my mom was just, it just made her more of a warm person. And we never had a relationship before. It was the first time we actually had a very close relationship.
Oh
So
wow.
it was almost like a healing place. But then it got a little weird. So I remember every single Sunday. I thought it was maybe just a few Sundays, but it was every single Sunday they would have announcements. But then they would always do this thing in which they would say somebody has a bad back or somebody has pain here and there. Please, God has a message for you and He wants to heal you today. Or they would talk about a miracle or a prophecy being foretold or something like that. And it was like every single Sunday, some miracle was always happening and somebody is always trying to cure somebody. It was almost
Wow.
like they were playing psychic or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was a little red flag. And then they also would have a little chant that they would put up on the board, and they would talk about how we want God to give us money and supernaturally give us money in our mailboxes
Yeah.
or things like
Wow.
that, and help give us jobs and give it. And so they had the prosperity doctrine, but it was very strange that we would chant that every Sunday,
Yeah.
asking God for somebody to give us
From the
money.
outside, it's super creepy, and obviously from the inside, it was too. But
Yeah.
when you're wrapped up in that kind of thing, it's just so it's just something you're doing. But like someone looking from the outside, or if someone has the the wherewithal to like be like, hey, wait a second, this is really weird. Why are we chanting this every Sunday? Yeah, it seems odd.
Yes. And then there was a poster about the seven mountains of how they want God to infiltrate all the aspects of culture, like the government, education, arts, entertainment,
Yeah.
so forth, so on. And they would always pray that they would concentrate on one of them, pray over it. And I was just like, why are churches trying to infiltrate
Right.
everything? That is so weird.
Yeah.
So I kind of saw that that was also a red flag. And then they were just very subtle, but it was almost like, again, you're not supposed to question things. And so I
Mm-hmm.
remember a sermon in which the pastor, he said that he went to, I think it was Bethel, and somebody had spoke out against some of the things that they were doing and saying. And they basically said that he was possessed by a demon, and so they need to perform an exorcism. So
Okay, so just to
everybody,
clarify, who thought who was it the new church that thought the Bethel pastor was possessed?
oh no, there was almost like a, so the church that we went to was in town, but they would learn everything from Bethel so that they could bring everything back and recreate everything that Bethel was doing into their church. And so they would always talk up Bethel and say how great Bethel is. And in fact, many people would even try and say they're doing something wrong and not according to church doctrine or biblical doctrine.
Ah,
And then they would always get called out and say, no, don't question us authority people. You are basically into your demonic presence. You have the devil in you.
yeah. If you question our leadership or Bethel's example, you are in the wrong, and you're the one who's not on track here.
In fact, they even would say that in this specific story, this person was possessed by a demon, and that's why he
Wow.
was saying these things. And so it was a very subtle way of saying, don't question anything we're saying and doing. So I just didn't really, I mean, many of the things he was saying was, it was just about being kind and nice and stuff like that, or helping people. But then there was just sometimes the stories there would be little subtle little stories like that that almost felt like there was a innuendo underneath it saying you're not
Yeah.
supposed to question us, otherwise we're going to think that you are demon possessed.
Yeah. So you
So
started to
I
notice that.
got I started to realize like, yeah, this was a little strange. And then my mom then told me about the angel feathers and the gold dust, and I was like, what? That sounds like a scam.
Yeah, yeah. It totally does. It's like it's the snake oil thing, or something.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
totally. And she then spent so much money going to Bethel and being part of the programs, and I felt really, I don't know, I just felt she was being scammed,
Kind of
and
roped
I
in.
was concerned. And she told me about the soakings and Sosa, and it was almost like therapy. They basically, I'm not exactly understanding the logistics of it, but you kind of soak in God's presence, I guess, and then He's supposed to help you through any of the maybe past traumas and stuff. It was almost like therapy, I guess.
Wow.
But my mom went through that a lot. So, and she also was part of the prayer team and helped pray for other people. So she was
Hmm.
really heavily involved. She also dedicated a lot of her time for free to the church,
Wow.
and she was really into it. The last straw for me was when, because I had a son, he would go to church. All I wanted for him was just to sing some songs and hear some stories, just simple
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Well, he told me he was taking a nap. They basically turned off the lights and they were napping. And so I thought it was weird. So I talked to the teacher and asked, what did you guys do for Sunday school today? And so they explained that sometimes they believe that the children are able to see visions and prophesy, and that God can actually use them and work through them just like adults. that spiritually they're just the same as adults.
Wow.
And they were basically teaching them how to have visions and stuff like that. And so I was just not okay with any of that, because I was actually going to school and learning about child development
Oh,
and realizing that
wow.
not actually how children's minds work, and this is dangerous. And so I was kind of like, I think I'm done with this church, and this is getting weird, and I don't want my son indoctrinated or being part of any of this.
Yeah. So then what did you do? What did you tell your mom? Did you just stop going to that church? Did you just tell her, like, we're going to find another church?
No, I didn't go back to any more churches, because I
Okay.
thought it was just like it was more the same, and it's just getting weirder and weirder, and I
Yeah.
just don't want to be part of it. But my mom was never forcing me to go to church. It wasn't
Okay.
something that we had
Yeah.
issues with. And I was an adult, and at
Yeah.
the same time, I I was actually dating somebody else, and they even went to the church, and they thought it was really strange too. And they never actually been part of a church in which somebody just fell down in the spirit or spoke in
Yeah.
tongues, laughed and cried uncontrollably. They thought this, and they were thinking we need to call the doctor or something.
Yeah, like,
I was
what is
having a
going on? Like,
seizure.
yeah.
They were really scared. Like, is that person okay?
Oh my
So
God.
they
Yeah.
thought the church was so weird. And so I even talked to him about it. It's like, what do you think of these things? And so he thought it was a really strange thing too. He was actually raised Baptist, and so a lot of this was really strange ideas.
Hmm.
But he wasn't religious, and he was just kind of trying to be a support
Okay.
for me.
Yeah.
So, but I think he was more vocal when I told him that I was like thinking this whole thing was kind of weird and scam, and then he
Then he's
became a
like,
little more
yeah, I
vocal.
think so
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Like, I didn't want to tell you, but this is weird. The things that they chant and stuff is strange. And so um, I eventually moved away from living with my mom and actually moved in with my boyfriend.
Okay.
And um, we, I then started to look into, well, actually, it was Easter Sunday, and I was just wanting to just go on YouTube and find a sermon, because I didn't want to go to church, but I
Yeah.
wanted to go on
Still
TV
get
and
some.
listen to
Yeah.
one. But then I happened to find this, I think it was a Catholic church, and he invited Sam Harris to come and talk to him and his congregation.
Wow.
And I'm not sure if it was Easter Sunday, and it was actually an old video, so I wasn't quite sure when this was, but I just
Yeah.
decided to listen to it because I thought it was so strange, a Christian inviting an atheist to church and
It is
asking them
strange.
questions.
Yeah.
I thought it was intriguing, and I wanted to
Cool.
see.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's cool. It's great. Yeah, but not normal.
yeah, it was I thought it was interesting. And so, but he was my first introduction to an atheist, and I thought, wow, this guy is actually really intelligent and smart, and I maybe they're not demon evil Satanists.
Possessed. Yeah, maybe they're not
Yeah,
like, yeah, being used by the devil.
exactly.
Yeah.
So then I started looking up other videos and wanting to see other Christians and atheists talk, and I
All
had no idea
right.
that there was this debate.
Now we're talking, Abby.
Yeah. And the first debate
Yeah.
was Christopher Hitchens that I actually watched.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, this guy is fun. And well, at first I was like
Yeah,
thinking these Christians are going to tell these atheists,
like they'll
what's
explain
the
it.
truth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And these atheists are going to have to, they're going to lose because I believed in God and this is true,
Mm-hmm.
until I started listening to the debate. And I was like, wow, these atheists have a point, and I don't know what they're talking about, because they're talking about history and science and facts and things that I don't know anything about.
Yeah.
And I never even questioned. And they were talking about things that never was taught in Christianity, where Christianity came from, and how the Bible came together, and all that stuff, and how the Bible doesn't quite align with history and facts, and so, or science. And so I just realized how terribly ignorant I was, and I just started to just constantly watch a ton of these videos.
Wow. That's cool. I've heard other people say that this is something that they did. Not everybody, but some people do. Like, they just start watching these videos, and this really, like, brings them down kind of this path of, like, enlightenment, I guess.
Well, I thought for me, yeah, maybe I thought it
Yeah.
was just like, what else did I not get told? I was only told this one
Yeah.
aspect of religion and Bible and Christianity, but then there was this whole other story that I never got told. It's like, what else do I not know? And from how I was taught to interpret the Bible is just kind of whatever God was telling you, and that was correct. But I didn't know that there were biblical scholarships or anything like that, in which somebody actually explained, what it actually means.
People who studied it.
Yeah, I didn't know that there were people that did that. So I just felt so ignorant and so stupid. So I started watching Christopher Hitchens, and then I started listening to Dawkins and getting interested in.
What was your boyfriend thinking of all this? Was he into it, learning about these things at all? Or?
He really wasn't paying attention to what I was watching. I was kind of doing it by myself. It wasn't until later when I wanted to read Christopher Hitchens' book, God is Not Great, that I really wanted to read that, but I thought that God was going to send me to hell if I read a book about him not being great. So I was really conflicted, and I was still really believing in hell, and I was really scared. It took years. This
process was like this
process was years. So we were married at the time. I was dating.
So you ended up marrying the boyfriend that you'd moved in with. Yeah. Okay. And years go by.
Mm-hmm. And I'm still slowly watching all these videos and learning all these things. And so then he started to kind of see what I was doing later. And I was telling him, I really want to read this book, but I'm afraid I'm going to go to hell if I read it. God's going to get really upset with me. And he kind of looked at me and was like, it's just a book. It's not going to hurt you. You're not going to go to hell. And so just read it, and it's good to get another perspective. And if you don't agree, it's okay, kind of a thing.
That's cool.
And so I started listening to it. And at first I was like, I'm going to say these atheists don't know anything. And I was trying to put my guard up and just like, I know all this, and they're not going to convince me and things like that. And then at the end of the book, I was just like, yeah, why do Christians say and do this? That's so weird. And I even said, I would ask all these questions to all these Christians, and they couldn't ever answer it or give me answers that was satisfactory. And all of a sudden he was able to answer all these things in this book. It was almost like mind opening. Wow. And then I was like, whatever happened to Christopher Hitchens? And then I realized he died.
Oh, no.
It's almost like I was years behind everyone else.
You're catching up with some of the,
Yeah. It's like, I didn't know any of this stuff. And then I was just like, oh my gosh, I just started liking him.
That's so sad. I hate it when something like that happens. It's sad on many levels, but it's so disappointing. You're like, okay, when's the next book coming out? Oh, this poor man's not here anymore. Yeah.
And I didn't realize how influential he was in the atheist community. But from there, I found The Thinking Atheist with Seth Andrews, and then The Atheist Experience. I think with both of those things, I took different things from it. So Seth Andrews, he was more of a kind of down to earth and just spoke to people and more of a human kind of emotional level. And so I was actually listening to the voices of atheists, and that they weren't those terrible people.
Yeah, they were just regular people, down to earth. Yeah.
And often they were just hurt by the ideas that people have on them. And I felt so guilty and upset that I thought these things about them, and I didn't know anything about them. And I even was listening to them talking, and some of them would break down crying, saying that they're not evil. And I would just start crying, saying, I'm so sorry for thinking you're evil.
Oh my gosh.
I almost had this kind of, kind of emotional experience, and just realizing atheists were not bad, and kind of dispelling that myth. And then with the atheist experience, because I still had, I guess, magical thinking, and I believed in the supernatural and things like that, and held on to the fact that I had unexplained experiences with God encounters and stuff. And so I was thinking, how do you explain that away? There must be a God. And so many people would call in talking to them about their personal experiences. And then Matt Dillahunty, who I thought was a complete jerk at first, would always come back and would try to work through the logistics of, exactly what you're believing and why it's not quite sound. And I had a really hard time understanding what he had to say, because I really was more, my mind was more in line with the Christians who had these experiences, because I connected with that until after listening to more and more of these videos and going through the same things, the same questions he would ask everybody over and over. And I started asking myself these things, that I realized that, I think I might have made some of these things up, or
That's
that
hard
maybe I
to,
was tricked.
was that hard
Mm-hmm.
to admit to yourself?
Yeah, it was almost like, well, I don't want to be fooled or duped or conned or anything like that, but I felt like maybe I was kind of conned and I fell for something that, I didn't want to fall for.
Yeah.
And I felt very stupid and I was very vulnerable. But that was kind of the last thing that I held on, that I eventually let go of Christianity and my relationship with God, and thinking God is real, and starting to realize more, that I started looking into psychology and even Darren Brown with how the mind could be manipulated, and learning about the placebo effect, because there were stories in which people were healed from cancer that I knew of. And so I learned about the placebo effect that helped kind of dispel those ideas. And
Wow.
so I was I just, it was kind of I was really sad, because I thought there was magic in the world. I thought I was special. I thought there was a God. And then I felt like my entire life was a waste.
Uh,
And I felt incredibly sad. And I felt like I was robbed, that a lot of the decisions that I've ever made, like getting married at 21 and dating and how to date and how to raise my kids or my son. And it was all because of the Bible, and it was all religious based and everything I was taught. And I realized that there was a lot of mistakes made. And if I wasn't Christian, if I wasn't taught all these things, I wouldn't have lived this. I've gone down this path. I don't
yeah.
think.
So you're feeling like I've been
And
duped, and you're feeling like now my life trajectory has completely been like it's going this direction because of Christianity, and like now you're second guessing, like you're thinking back and thinking, why did this have to happen? Like why?
yeah, I felt like my 20s was robbed. I really wished that I would have been able to travel, finish school, had other aspirations. I was raised in a very strict religious home in which I was afraid of literally everything. I had no confidence in myself. In fact, I even felt that I was worthless. And I wish that I had the confidence. My parents would constantly leave us alone, my siblings and I, or my sister and I, in the middle of nowhere. So they go to church all the time. And we didn't have a relationship with our parents. We were neglected. And, there's just so many different aspects of the decisions my parents made, and how they raised us, and how they related to everybody and us, and the decisions I made and who I became later on in life. I think it was just upsetting, is because it was all centered around all these ideologies of church and religion and all the problems with it, especially
Yeah.
the sexual sin and all that stuff, and that prompted me to get married the way I did. And I just wish that I had a different life. Right now, I find peace at where I am. That I like who I am. I love my children. If I didn't go down this path, I wouldn't have my children.
Yeah.
I would have not met my new husband. I would have, not been the position that I'm in now. So I like where I am now. But at the
Yeah.
time when I started to, recognize all this,
It's a
that this
hard.
all was just, it was upsetting. And it was just like I felt like I was robbed of my life.
Wow. Yeah, that's really hard. I mean, I'm sure, like I've definitely, I had moments like that for sure. Like thinking about, like, why did I have to get born into a Christian family? Why was I, of all the Christians I knew, why was I the one that took it so seriously? Like there were other Christians that, like, they were Christians and they were fine with it, and they just did they did normal things with their life. But like, I kind of went to the extreme. My wife and I decided not to use birth control because we thought God didn't want us to like you just think, why did I fall for that, or why did I, it's really upsetting. It's hard to cope. It's hard to accept when you've been fooled, or I'm speaking for myself, when I was feel like I've been fooled, and I've made a dumb mistake, and it was not just a little mistake. It was a huge life altering mistake or decision or whatever. That's a hard thing to have to process, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other part of it was when I realized I think I'm atheist and my entire whole family is Christian.
And when did that
now
moment
I'm
happen,
alone.
or when did that realization come about?
Um, well, shortly after I kind of got rid of the magical thinking and that I had this relationship with God, it was many months and maybe even a year after that's when I realized I think I'm atheist. But I think I was kept it to myself, and then I was kind of closeted for a long time, and it was
Were you married at the
actually,
time when you realized you were an atheist?
yes, I was married to
Okay.
my second husband, not my
Okay.
first.
Okay. So the husband you're married to now is the second boyfriend you had, right?
Hmm.
Like that you moved in with, and then he was like, "It's just a book. It's this." That's who you're married to
Yeah.
still. That's
Hmm.
good. That's awesome.
But I don't marry your first boyfriend or your second boyfriend. Don't do what I did.
Like this isn't
Yeah,
a blueprint, okay, people? Yeah.
yeah, this is something you probably shouldn't do. In fact, my siblings always make fun of me, like, yeah, don't marry your first boyfriend, but you shouldn't marry your second boyfriend either.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
my husband
It's
now,
funny.
he was just such a wonderful person that every person that met him, they all told me, you gotta marry him. He's just perfect.
That's
So,
cool.
yeah, he's wonderful. So I'm so
I
glad that I married him.
I know it's a simple thing, but I love his advice to just when you're like, you're in the Christian mindset and you're freaking out like, oh no, it's an atheist book, and oh, what's gonna happen, and I can't, and he's like, it's just a book. If you don't agree with it, then you don't have to believe it. It's just such a simple answer, but it's so like for a Christian, that's a really profound realization.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But then I also thought, well, if God sends me to hell, I'm taking him down with me because he told me to read the books.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That's funny.
he was very helpful in helping me like not be afraid to learn and ask questions,
Yeah.
look into these things, and it's okay. He wasn't raised with all these supernatural, magical thoughts like I
Mm-hmm.
was in my head.
It
So
really messes with your brain. It really
yeah.
makes you're in a different world. You're thinking in a very different way than a non-Christian
Hmm.
or a
I mean,
non-spiritual person. Yeah, maybe.
one example is the house that we moved into. When we first moved in, we had all these problems. I kept finding nails in the carpet, and I would painstakingly look for the nails in the carpet, and I couldn't find any. And then all of a sudden, I would step on a nail. And so I was just like thinking there was
Wow.
something wrong with this house. And every single time I would pass by the kitchen, we have these like plastic panes on the that covers the light. Every single
Mm-hmm.
time I passed by, it would crash down and almost hit me, and it kept happening. And I was just thinking like, and there were parts of like the house that had like flies that just wouldn't die. And so I was just like thinking all of these things mean this house is possessed and it's evil. And so I actually had one of my siblings come out and have
Like
a
pray
holy
over it.
start
Yeah.
praying over it and everything. And I was so scared. And I even thought when he was praying, our lights was flickering. And I was like thinking it meant something. And so living over the years, I just realized some parts of the house, we just get flies seasonally. And
That's so funny.
our
Yeah.
lights would flicker sometimes, I think, when we turned on some lights. And then sometimes, I think maybe because we slammed the door a little too hard, then the plastic isn't on there quite tight, and so it fall
So
down.
it falls
So
off. That's
it's
so
just like
funny.
all of a sudden, I didn't have this magical thinking. It just had irrational
Wow.
explanation for things. But that's where I was. I was thinking everything meant like either
Yeah.
sin or God or something.
I mean, probably most people who listen to this podcast have been there and thought those things. I mean, I definitely thought in those terms. And we all know people who still think in those terms. So it's very funny, I think, and interesting to look back and be like, oh yeah, well we just seasonally get flies, or oh yeah, when we slam the door, it just happens to knock that thing down sometimes. It's like such a simple explanation, for some of these things.
And my
Yeah.
husband saw those as very rational explanations, and he just didn't understand why I was freaking out and eating holy water everywhere.
That's so funny. The holy water
Yeah,
came out. That's really funny.
yeah. So,
So how long have you been an atheist then?
well, I've been closeted maybe a year, but
Wow.
I mean,
You
sorry,
were closeted for a
for
year,
a year, and
about,
then
yeah.
last year I started during COVID. I thought it was a great time
Oh,
to tell everybody I'm an atheist
perfect. Yeah.
because
You're all
I just
separated.
got
Yeah.
well, I just got so tired of everyone praying and they would send me messages and texts, and everyone was telling me, all my cousins and my siblings, about all the great things God was doing in their lives and everything, and they would always talk in these religious ways, and I think I just kind of got tired, and I said, they want me to know them. Why can't I be myself and tell them who I am? And so I just explained, I don't mind listening to your beliefs and what you think God is doing in your life. But I just want to be transparent with you that I'm actually atheist and I don't really believe in any of this anymore. And I even had to explain I'm not rebellious. I'm not, this isn't just something that I just kind of came up with all of a sudden. This took me years. I did a lot of research. I took a lot of thoughts. It was a painful experience. It was hard for me. And so, this is who I am. And so, if you want to pray for me or if you want me to listen to your prayers, I don't mind doing it, just out of courtesy to you. But I'm just letting you know I don't really believe in any of this.
Yeah.
So, some of them, they said, okay, well, that's fine. And I'm not worried. I just know that you love to research and look into things. So just keep researching and eventually you'll find the truth back to God. So that was kind of their explanation. And then there's some
Condescending,
people,
loving explanation.
yeah. And then there are some people that told me I was going to hell now and that now my whole family's going to go to hell. And it's a
Wow.
shame because we're such a nice family and that now we're going to do this. We're
So
doomed.
ridiculous. Were those
So,
people just like friends, or were
no,
those
they were
close
family
friends?
members.
Family members said that.
Yeah.
Wow. So
So
some family
I,
members were like, "You'll find your way," and others were like, "You're gonna go to hell."
and then some of them just didn't talk
Wow.
to me anymore. So, well, I
Wow.
have a lot of pastors in my family too. So they probably did not take the news well.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, and it kind of felt freeing that I was
That's
now
awesome.
finally being able to be who I am. And I don't have
Yeah.
to make things up. And I got tired of people coming to my house and expecting all of us to pray over dinner. It's like, this is my home. You can go to your house,
Yeah.
you can pray, but I don't want everyone to pray and do things
Yeah.
that you practice in my house. So I thought
Yeah.
maybe if they understood where I was coming from, they would stop doing that.
Yeah. Well, maybe they will because they won't be able to come over.
Yeah.
Because they won't want to because they're freaked out or something, or they think you're an evil atheist now. Who knows? But yeah, well, it's really nice to hear like the tone in your voice is very like self-assured and very like when I think back to like the little girl you described who was first adopted and was like incredibly vulnerable and like basically the world was dictating to her where she'd go, what she'd do, and like you had no control. And now you're just like, you're not going to pray in my house. It's my house, and it's just very cool to see like that this is kind of where you're at now.
Yeah, and I think it's because I was listening to so many other atheists and have confidence, and that it kind of gave me that confidence. And also, it really helps when you actually know
That's
things.
great.
When I studied stuff,
Yeah.
learned some facts and stuff, then it was just on my side. And
Yeah.
so, but then you start seeing everything in this world and start seeing like, oh wow, there's a lot of scams in this world. So my family's also into Young Living essential oils, and then they're also into this diet that's also multi-level marketing, and they've also paid for other diet pills. And it's just like
Wow.
once you start with this magical thinking, you start applying it to everything else in this world, and you start
Yeah.
seeing the scams once you start realizing how it all works. And so I feel like even more protected that,
That's
being a little bit more
cool.
skeptical and asking questions and starting to know things that actually helps life skills.
That's great. That's so cool. So as now that you're in such a different place and you're a different person, when you look back on the most Christian version of yourself. What do you think about that person now?
Um, I just feel really sad for her because she felt so lonely and scared and vulnerable, and she was just so just unwanted, unloved, and just had no self-confidence, and just felt so lonely. Um, I mean, I just wish that I knew the things that I knew now, but at a younger age.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wish that I had different. I wish my parents were different. I wish that even if they were Christians, um, they they were different. And so I think what's really helped me now is that since I know so much about abuse, I know so much about religion and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I can kind of heal a bit more with. I have two sons, so I could be the parent that I wanted and give the
That's so
life
cool.
to my children that I wanted, give them choices and make them feel like they have some control in their life and they're valuable, that they matter, and that they are their own person. They don't belong to anybody. Because I was told that my body wasn't mine because I didn't pay for it. I belonged to my parents. I was property. And so I wasn't
Wow.
allowed to make decisions for myself. Then my parents made all the decisions. And so when I moved out, I didn't know how to make decisions for myself. And I didn't know how to critically think. I actually had to take classes on learning how to think because I didn't know how to do that. Um,
Yeah.
and so I'm teaching my son how to think. I ask him questions. We talk about all religions, not just Christianity, and ask him what he thinks. I read him stories and ask him what he thinks about it. And I want him to know about science and history and get as much education as possible. I want to teach him how to research and to think on his own and be skeptical.
That's
And
cool.
at the end, if he wants to be religious, it's his choice. I want to be able to give him a choice, a voice.
Yeah. So, kind of along the same lines or similar to the last question. I always really like to ask, when you think back on that person, that, the little girl you were, and then all the way through this time that you've, your life up to this point, you went through some enormous changes, huge changes in your life. You're very different in some ways than you were then. But what's something positive about yourself that you can say is the same today, that you can see kind of in your life, like a thread that carries through till today?
I would say I'm pretty persistent and I'm a survivor. I survived through a lot of difficult things. I'm pretty tough. I can handle a lot of things. Um, I like that about
That's
myself. And
cool.
also I like creativity. I like art. I like beautiful things in my life. And so I've always liked that. I still like that. I like to create and um, um, yeah, that's something that I've always been. So strong.
Hmm. That's great. I love that. What's something you were able to learn or experience now, that you're not a Christian, that you wouldn't have if you had stayed Christian? Something you learned or
Oh,
experienced.
I watch a lot of horror movies now.
Horror movies? That's hilarious.
Now I watch exorcism movies and stuff, and I don't think it's the documentary anymore. I
That's
think it's
hilarious. That's great.
I watch all kinds of horror movies now. I think it's so much fun now, and now I'm not afraid of it, and I can now read
Yeah,
books and movies and without thinking something's gonna open a portal to hell or something. So
that's hilarious. For people who are kind of going through what you went through, who are recently deconverted, what kind of encouragement or guidance would you give someone like that who's maybe kind of going through that process right now?
I think what always helps me was doing a lot of research and also listening to stories. The reason why I'm here even sharing my stories because I've listened to so many others, and it's given me a lot of the confidence and safety and feeling like I'm supported in going on this journey and kind of finding out the truth kind of thing, and not being afraid. And so listening to stories and doing lots of research, getting as much facts under your belt, and then finding a support group. So I discovered Facebook groups, and so I found out in my community there's an atheist group. And it's been so much fun connecting with them, and they're funny. They put all kinds of religious memes on there, and it makes me laugh all the time. And the things that I used to think, you're not supposed to make fun of this or talk about this. They just totally make fun of all these little memes. And then also whenever anybody's having a difficult time, they would share that, and everybody would be incredibly supportive. So definitely check out Facebook groups or any kind of support groups in the community. It's just so helpful when you live in the same community and you can kind of almost like get together and stuff eventually, create new friends.
That's cool. That's really good advice. Yeah, I got connected with a few atheist groups, and I still have a few friends that will like get onto Zoom every once in a while and like just chat for an hour or two about anything. Doesn't have to be about religion, but it usually comes up, Yeah. So it's good. It's nice to find people that you can connect with like that.
Mm-hmm. Or there's other people you can connect with that doesn't have anything to do with religion. That
sure, yeah.
Yeah, being atheist isn't my entire identity.
Yeah, and I think that's healthy, and I think that's good. I think for a time it kind of has to be as you're deconverting, because you're just like, oh my gosh, this world is like so new to me, and I'm trying to figure out who I am and what I believe and what I think about everything. But yeah, once people kind of work through that, I think it's great to, if you want to keep that in your life and make that a big part of your life, great. But there's so much more in the world to explore and learn about, and that's all exciting and great too. If someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I have an email, Abigail Sandoval, 1011@gmail.com. I have a YouTube channel. It's called Adopted Life. And then Designs by Unhe is my Instagram, which I try to share some of the art stuff that I try to do, some of the crafts that I'm into. And I'm into creating and doing art projects, and then also talking about other aspects of my life. In my YouTube channel, I mostly talk about my experience with adoption and also reconnecting with my birth parents. Actually, I recently found my birth mother, not my birth father, and we've been actually reconnecting, and that's been kind of healing. And so I wanted to create a YouTube channel talking about that. So
that's so awesome.
But yeah, you can contact me on my email if you want to talk.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Abby, I really appreciate all the time you took. It was really wonderful to hear your story, and I think it's a really important story, and I'm really happy that you shared it, and I think there are going to be people that are really touched by it, and I think it's a really beautiful thing that you started a YouTube channel to talk about some of the things that you went through and to try to help other people. I think that's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. It's so nice to meet you.
Thanks for listening to Voices of Deconversion. Join us next time by following or subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts.